Shalom, and welcome to Light of the Hill Ministries. And in today's teaching, we'll be talking about Pesach, or as it's commonly called, Passover and unleavened bread. If you want to follow along, I will be posting this in the comment box below. Now, under the teaching. In the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, between the evening, is the Pesach to Yahweh. And on the 15th day of this new moon is the festival of Matzot to Yahweh. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. On the first day you have a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. And you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. On the 7th day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. Leviticus 23, verses 5 through 8. As the preaching of the good news of the kingdom reaches to the ends of the earth, there is an ever-increasing number of believers in Yahushua submitting to the Torah, the marriage contract of the kingdom. As new believers desire to embrace a Torah-observant lifestyle, they're often filled with questions as to where to begin and how to keep the Torah. The Sabbath, kosher keeping, and learning to celebrate the appointed times of Yahweh seems to be the best beginning points for learning to walk in rhythm with the set-apart one of Israel. In this teaching, we will focus on Passover and unleavened bread. In many ways, the birth of the nation of Israel took place in the events surrounding the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt. In a very real sense, the Passover celebration is Israel's first Independence Day. During the events leading up to the actual exodus out of Egypt, Yahweh made distinctions between the children of Israel and the people of Egypt. Yahweh further set the children of Israel apart from the nations by calling them to a new walk with him. The very first thing that Yahweh did at this time was to establish a new calendar for the children of Israel. Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, saying, "This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you." Exodus 12, verses 1 through 2. This calendar contains the specific appointed times and rehearsals that the children of Israel are to keep throughout their generation. By keeping these appointed rehearsals, the children of Israel would be set apart from the rest of the nations and live in rhythm with the Torah. Keeping these appointed rehearsals is a vital part of fulfilling the calling to be the manifest presence of Yahweh in the world. In many ways, the restoration of the image of Yahweh in the world will begin with Israel keeping his calendar with its appointed rehearsals. We should also realize that within the details of these feasts, the history of Yahweh's relationship with Israel is recalled. Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits celebrate the deliverance and birth of Israel as the firstborn of Yahweh, as well as their calling to be a leaven-free nation. Pentecost, Shavuot, recalled entering into the covenant at Sinai through the giving and receiving of the Torah. The Day of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles also depict Israel's crossing in the wilderness, entering in the Promised Land, and establishing a kingdom. Thus, there is clearly a historical nature to these appointed rehearsals. By keeping the calendar, we are constantly reminded of what Yahweh has done to bring us to this present age and day. We should also realize that we remember these events not only to recall the past, but also to shape the present. By connecting very specific actions or rituals to these appointed times, Yahweh makes it evident that we are not merely to intellectually recall the past or read about these events, but that in some small way we are to relive it. By reliving the events recalled in each of these feasts, we give every generation the opportunity to experience these events for themselves. As each generation experiences the Exodus, they're connected to the preceding generation that came out of Egypt. Thus, every generation of the children of Israel can claim, and it shall be when your sons ask you in time to come, saying, "What is this?" Then you shall say to him, "By strength of hand, Yahweh brought us out of Mizraim, out of the house of bondage." Exodus 13, verse 14. We must also realize that these appointed rehearsals have a prophetic future application as well. In this regard, we see that these appointed rehearsals are shadow pictures of things yet to come. As Paul wrote, "Let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of the Messiah." Colossians 2, verses 16 through 17. Within the various feasts of Yahweh, we witness the shadow pictures of the birth, life, ministry, death, resurrection, and return of the Messiah. Within Passover, we witness the Messiah as the Lamb slain, that by the application of his blood in faith, the judgment of Yahweh passes over us. As Paulus once again writes, "Therefore, cleanse out the old leaven, so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened. For also Messiah, our Pesach, was slaughtered for us. So then, let us celebrate the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." 1 Corinthians 5, verses 7 through 8. In the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we celebrate the incorruptible nature of Messiah, who did not decay in the grave. Unleavened bread is a picture of Yahweh's set-apartness and sinlessness. His life and sacrifice was, as it were, unleavened, and therefore was considered a lamb spotless and unblemished for the ultimate Passover sacrifice. The precious blood of Messiah as of a lamb unblemished and spotless. 1 Peter 1, verse 19. The first fruit offerings celebrate the resurrection of the Messiah as the first fruit from the grave. The Feast of Shavuot, or as it's commonly called, Pentecost, prophesies the Messiah pouring out the Spirit of the set-apart one upon his disciple in order that he may write the Torah upon the hearts of believers. The Day of Trumpets declares the return of Messiah. The Day of Atonement declares Messiah's day of judgment and the national redemption of Israel. The Feast of Tabernacles prophesies the establishment of the Messianic kingdom upon the earth. And by keeping the calendar of Yahweh with all its appointed rehearsals, we proclaim in our actions and words the good news of the kingdom. By keeping in rhythm with Yahweh's prophetic calendar, we also find ourselves being prepared for all that is yet to come. By keeping the appointed rehearsals, Yahweh will have us in the right place at the right time when the fulfillment of all these prophecies come to pass. Let us now turn our attention to the scriptural requirements for the first of the annual appointed rehearsals of Yahweh. I want to be very clear from the start that Pesach or Passover is not a feast, but a slaughtering. The Pesach is the lamb or kid that is slaughtered, and whose blood is applied to the doorpost of the house. The feast where the meat of the Pesach is eaten is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In time, These two separate events have become so connected to one another that the name of the whole week in which the unleavened bread is eaten has come to be called Passover. With this in mind, let us now turn to the teaching on Passover and unleavened bread. The first question we will address is when Pesach and unleavened bread are to be celebrated. The Torah is very clear on the timing of Pesach and unleavened bread. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Mizraim, saying, "This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you." Exodus 12, verses 1 through 3. Today you are going out in the month of the Aviv. Exodus 13, verse 4. Guard the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, in the appointed time of the month of the Aviv. Because in the month of the Aviv you came out from Mizraim. Exodus 34, verse 18. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai, in the first month of the second year after they had come out of the land of Mizraim, saying, "Now let the children of Israel perform the Passover at its appointed time." Numbers 9, verses 1 through 2. Guard the month of Aviv and perform the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim. For in the month of the Aviv, Yahweh your Elohim brought you out of Mizraim by night. Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. There are a number of important lessons to be learned from these few verses. First, we should note that the Hebrew word aviv is a description of the state of the barley as being nearly ripe. The Torah gives us a general description of the barley in this state. We may remember that during the plagues Yahweh used to smite Egypt, hail rained down on the fields and destroyed the barley, while the wheat that was just sprouting was not damaged. The flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in aviv and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not smitten, for they were late crops. Exodus 9, verses 31 to 32. Here we see the aviv barley was mature enough to be somewhat brittle and was therefore damaged by the hail that fell. The wheat was just beginning to sprout and was flexible enough to withstand the falling hail. Another passage that helps us to determine the boundaries of the definition of aviv barley is one where the first fruits offering is described. And if you bring a grain offering of your first fruits to Yahweh, bring for the grain offering for your first fruit green heads, aviv, of grain roasted on fire, crushed heads of new grain. Leviticus 2, verse 14. The barley is the first of the first fruits offering made during the year. Here we should note that the aviv barley was still moist or green, therefore was dried or roasted by fire before it was offered. Thus, we see that aviv barley is mature enough to be brittle, but still moist. We should also note that the first fruit offering was made after Passover and unleavened bread. Aviv barley was thus defined as being about 15 days from being ripe for the harvest. We should also note that the word aviv is an adjective and not a proper name. The word aviv appears 7 times in the scriptures, 4 of which contain the definite article the. This confirms the fact that the aviv is the description of a stage of the barley's maturity, and not the proper name of a month. Another detail that needs to be mentioned here is the sighting of the new moon. The scriptural month is determined by the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon. At the end of the 12th scriptural month, a search for the Aviv barley began. If the barley was indeed Aviv, where the new moon was sighted, then in Rosh Hashanah, that is to say, the new moon was declared. This became the first month of the scriptural year, also called Rosh Hashanah. In English, is head of the year, or the month of Aviv. The barley was not, if the barley was not yet right, or Aviv and Aviv, then a 13th month would be added to this calendar. At Passover and unleavened bread would be celebrated in the following month. So we learned that according to Yahweh's reckoning of time, the timing of Passover and unleavened bread is determined by the barley being Aviv and the sighting of the new moon. This practice of determining the time of Passover continued throughout the Second Temple period and the lifetime of Yahushua. The current rabbinic calendar is based upon the calculated calendar of Hillel II. Was not adopted until 359 BC. Now that we have determined when Passover and unleavened bread are to be celebrated, for the next teaching, we will turn our attention to the question of how they are to be celebrated. Hallelujah. If you like this teaching, please comment, like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification button to be notified of the next teaching. Yahweh bless, and shalom to your homes.